It's time to bring you yet another amazing episode. And now, welcome your host.
Good to have you on the show. This is Omobola Stephen. I'm the host, Omobola Stephen. On Omobola Stephen, we focus on personal development and self-improvement topics, occasioning experts and professionals who are adept in these topics, offering disruptive yet constructive mindship conversations on these topics that is going to provide the transformation and positive changes you and I need in this side of eternity. Now, we emphasize the importance of embracing personal development and self-improvement along the course of our lives, because when we do so, we tend to find ourselves along the way. And in finding ourselves, we realize that there's so much bounties, benefits that the universe is always offering us at point in time if we don't give up. Now, personal development and self-improvement is a lifelong process, and so it's something that we need to constantly improve upon and work upon in order for us to see these tremendous changes that we have always been looking forward to at the end of the day if we don't give up. Today, I'll be focusing on health and wellness, especially looking at FASD, which is about Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. And I have an expert on the show with me. I have Patricia Kasper. We call her Patti, and she's a Trauma-Informed FASD coach on Omobola Stephen. Thanks for joining me on the show and looking forward to this great discussion we're having on the podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Has the FAST, Fetal Alcohol Syndrome or Spectrum Disorder. It can occur when the mother drinks alcohol during pregnancy. And it's all clear that between 1 to 20 people, 1 out of 20 people are being affected and diagnosed, and only 0.01% of the time. Now, this is a worthy topic for discussion, especially at the time like this. And Patti has a lot to share in this regard because this is an area of expertise. Patti, so can we just dive right in? Let's talk about FAST and what we really need to know.
Okay. Well, FAST, Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders, really the children being affected prenatally by alcohol has been around as long as alcohol is, so thousands and thousands of years. But we've only really known about it as a thing worthy of study since 1968. There was a French team that studied it, and then in the US, in Seattle, Dr. Ken Jones and David Smith realized in 1973 that the children of alcoholic mothers had characteristic changes to their face that were in common. This part, the philtrum, is elongated and smoother than most. There's next to no upper lip, and the eyes are small, and the folds and the corners are just a little bit different. Those are the classic signs of fetal alcohol syndrome, which only affects 10% of the cases on the whole spectrum. So that means 90% of those cases of people who are affected by alcohol don't have the outward signs to indicate that there's something wrong, to indicate that there have been some changes to their brain and the way their minds work that make it difficult to fulfill other people's expectations in a way that is expected. And so, for instance, one very common problem is auditory processing. Oftentimes, people listen slowly and really struggle with rapid fire speech. So when you did your intro, I was like really listening to try and capture it all because, we need more time. So when you're interacting someone with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, it's always a good idea to slow down and be more relaxed, use fewer words. If you think of, like, if you've seen the movie Zootopia, which is a Disney flick, a Pixar flick, there's a scene where there's a detective going into the bank, and the detective's a jackrabbit who lives life at the speed of a New York minute, right? But all of the people working at the DMV are sloths who are notoriously slow. And those animals really were chosen for a purpose. to show that conflict when people move at different speeds. They process things at different speeds. And we see that routinely with people who are affected by alcohol. Alcohol affects whatever it touches in the developing baby. And it does more damage than any other drug when it comes to prenatal harm, because alcohol is a solvent. And the substances that perform those or that form those protective barriers, whether it's cellular or system-wide, like the blood-brain barrier or the placenta also, all those things are made of lipids, which is fat, which alcohol dissolves. So alcohol is able to damage many more structures in the baby than other drugs are able to. And because every part of the child develops at a different point during those 9 months, the symptoms of FASD vary widely from person to person because it depends on the timing of when that drink was consumed. It depends on the frequency, how much. You can have a singular, in the entire 9 months, one drink, if it's alcohol intensive, like for instance, a Long Island iced tea has 6 shots of liquor in it, and Alabama Slammer has 7 shots of liquor in it. You know, depending on the timing of when that one drink was consumed, that child can suffer for its entire life in a multitude of ways. There are, and this is where your emphasis on health and wellness comes in, there are 428 comorbid physical conditions that people with FASD are more inclined to develop. And so when
Now, okay,
yes.
go ahead.
Well, they are illnesses and conditions that affect, you know, like I said, every body structure. There are issues with bone development. There can be abnormalities with finger and toe development, cleft palate, cleft lip. There can be abnormalities in just any kind of thing. I'm friends with someone who has stage 4 liver disease without having been a drinker because of his mother's drinking during the pregnancy. So a lot of the physical things that can happen to someone with FASD don't show up for years. And it's not uncommon for the medical experts to explain to people who are getting assessed that it is as if we are aging more quickly. So we tend to get things that are generally associated with older age at diagnosis. For instance, early onset dementia, right, which is diagnosis before the age of 65. People with FASD are 206 times more likely to have early onset dementia. So that's definitely a quality of life issue. You know, the struggles can be seen in terms of behaviors, but they really, except for that 10% that have the facial features, you can't see it. So we are invisible, but we are 1 in 20, which means there are several people on every block of suburbia that have it. There is 1 to 2 children in every classroom that has it. And, you know, the struggles are things, for instance, difficulty with abstract concepts. You know, well, what's abstract? It's anything you can't hold in the palm of your hand to figure out how it works. You know, so math, that's very abstract. Language is abstract. Time is abstract. If you can't hold in your head the awareness that time marches on while you're occupied doing something, then time is literally standing still. These are the people that are constantly surprised when you come and say, come on, let's go. I said 10 minutes, right? And it's not that they're being willfully disobedient or disrespectful. but the awareness of time marching on is just not there. And so when things happen, not every memory that's made gets a date stamp. And without that happening, then we're much more at risk of dementia. But in the short term, we tend to do things called confabulation, which is filling in the blanks. If there's a blank in our memory block, we don't have an explanation for something that we're being asked about, then we just grasp at straws and come up with the best explanation we can make on the fly, because no one likes disappointing people and making them upset. You know, there's one commonality, is that there's an eagerness to please. And so they'll come up with any story, no matter how crazy it is. You know, for instance, these are the kids where the parent says, I told you not to take that. I didn't take it, and it's in the child's hand. They have no awareness of having taken it, which is another common issue. Another abstract concept is private property. If something's not labeled, then why can't it be theirs? It's not labeled with someone's name, so how do I know it's theirs? You know, that's just a concept that some people struggle to grasp. So, and I think that applies to a lot of kleptomaniacs, right? The kids that steal everything in sight. Yes, some of that is from neglect, and some of that is from the households that have nothing, and so the kids are taught to steal. But some of it is just the absolute lack of awareness that there's private property, or that you taking things that aren't yours is an abstract concept, and some people really struggle with it. There's also another common thing, is the inability to connect actions and consequences. So if you can't predict outcomes based on past experiences, if you can't connect those things, then there's nothing to stop your impulsiveness. And this is a very frustrating problem for a lot of parents. You know, it's because it's addressed over and over and over again. Society, rightly so, has a taboo against taking things, against acting rashly, against being impulsive. We're expected to, you know, get over those kinds of behaviors when we're older than 3. But
now, aside the alcohol consumption, what are some of the risk factors?
Basically, the CDC has said, and rightly so, although they did walk it back from their labels years ago, that in order to curb this epidemic, the entire household needs to be abstinent from alcohol for 3 months prior to conception. And the reason they choose 3 months, science has borne out in that alcohol, like I said before, it goes through membranes. It touches anything that it comes in contact with because it gets into the bloodstream. With men, it affects the sperm. And sperm, after they're produced, are stored for 3 months. So it's important, if you want healthy children, to be abstinent for 3 months before you try and conceive. With women, we don't call those FASD effects, although I believe that may change as that line of research is dragged, furthered. But with women, women are more likely to use alcohol to cope with stress if they were brought up in homes that modeled that. If you look at our media, whether it's commercials or movies or TV shows, we see alcohol being used as a way of providing comfort from stress, also as a means of celebration. It is used, it's the magical elixir that is used on all occasions, right? Whether it's celebratory or mourning or getting that liquid courage, right? Because it's a social lubricant. but our society embraces it. Not just our society, worldwide, it really is embraced, but our society in particular really, really embraces it. And the funny thing is, if alcohol had to go through the FDA approval process, it would never have been approved because of its destructive properties. But the FDA is not over alcohol. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is, and they're only concerned with the money they bring in from licenses, not public health. But you said in the beginning of the show that it is 100% preventable, and I would challenge that. It would be nice to believe that that's so. But believing that is the case, all that belief does is further the stigma against the mothers, who most of whom have inadvertently harmed their kids, and against the kids, even though the kids have not done anything wrong to bring it upon themselves, they still feel all the effects of the stigma. And the reason is because most women don't realize they're pregnant until they miss a period. And that is oftentimes the second or third month before that happens. So you're looking at the first trimester of not knowing that you're pregnant. So there's no reason to make those lifestyle changes, which most women make as soon as they have pregnancy confirmation. All those bad habits go away. It's a maternal instinct that's very strong. But we cannot blame a woman for using a legal substance that is embraced by society when she doesn't even know she's pregnant, right? We've got to blame the substance, which is
the diagnosis of FASD is a gold standard. There's no gold standard for it, and it is abysmal. So the question is, what are some of the factors that are affecting this rate?
Well, one of the reasons, again, why it's seldom diagnosed is because of the stigma. A lot of the characteristics are in common with ADHD, the inattentiveness, because the brain is wired in such a way that it's hard to hold that focus. Also, autism, many of those characteristics are identical with those of FASD, and there's an overlap. It's said that 90% of people who have FASD are also ADHD. Now, mind you, in women, ADHD looks different than it does in men, because the hyperness is not in physical actions, it's in the speed and scatteredness of thought, right? The professional squirrel chasers. When we are in the middle of one thing and a random thought crosses our path, and there off we go. And so a lot of providers will say, you know what, let's just run with this other diagnosis because there's no stigma, and B, there are available treatments. And so it is thought that that is kinder than introducing that stigma of being diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Unfortunately, those other conditions do not have, as part of the package, a predilection to 428 physical comorbidities. And being at risk for various disorders and conditions is, that risk factor is part of medical history that every person deserves to have, and comes in very handy with a doctor. I mean, it would make a big difference for a doctor to know, I need to be looking for this, that, and the other thing when they're making their differential diagnosis. So without the diagnosis, a lot of things are just missed and caught off guard and not realized. If you know someone that has a whole lot of different physical conditions, well, maybe alcohol was part of that.
Right. Thank you for sharing that thought with my audience, really. But really, in terms of all this stigmatization, which is really a big deal, for these women out there. How can we tackle both the stigmatization, also the scientific uncertainty that poses out there, and also the respect for women's autonomy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I am acquaintances with someone who had an idea years back, and he found there was a community in Alaska that was willing to test this out. You know, there's, before I get to that, let's talk about the stigma. Who do you think is more stigmatized? Female convicts or women who drank during pregnancy? It's women who drank during pregnancy are more widely condemned by peers and society than women who have struggled in life and for whatever reason wound up in prison. And that's not me saying that. That was a big study. I can't think of the moment of who that was that studied it, but it's referenced in one of my podcasts with Dr. Ken Jones, who's one of those people who discovered back in '73 about fetal alcohol syndrome. But another colleague of mine in Alaska decided he was going to test the theory about what can be done in terms of prevention. And he not only, he went to 4 or 5 different bars in this one community, and he not only put up signs about alcohol can harm your baby, but he also put free pregnancy tests in the bathroom. And he's had half a dozen women write to him afterward, thanking him because it's how they found out they were pregnant and they made choices to protect their children that night. So it's entirely possible to address that stigma in a way that gives women information, and they can make those autonomous decisions. Not every woman chose to take advantage of the pregnancy kit, but many of them did. And they were empowered by that choice and empowered to act for their best interest as well as their child's. And that's what we do. If we know there's a harm, we tend to avoid it. So another big thing about combating that stigma is to constantly bring back the fact that we cannot blame women for using a substance that's legal before they know there's a baby. It's very rare for a woman to purposely continue to drink after she knows that she's pregnant. When that happens, there's usually a couple reasons. One could be that they cannot quit on their own. They need help, but most treatment centers turn pregnant women away. Another reason is women who are severely traumatized, major PTSD. They may be their mind and body may be disconnected to the point that there's no bond with that baby inside. They don't recognize it as part of them, as their legacy. And because they're not acknowledging the reality of that growing child, they keep doing what they do in order to continue numbing their pain. So there's a lot of reasons why people drink, whether or not there's a pregnancy. And it's really not for any of us to judge that, but just offer help and support where we can.
But really, the systems of care for the FASD continues to implement psychological strategies for this neurological condition. And I hope that you can agree with me in this regard. Now, do you think that this approach or this system, do you think is enough?
Well, we cannot teach what we don't know, right? And none of us knew what we didn't know until we finally learn it. So the professors at various training programs, whether it's medicine or social work or at the School of Education or whatever professional someone is trying to become, those schools cannot teach what they don't yet understand. And for the most part, FASD is looked at through a psychology lens, because what is seen as behavior. And our society, our universe really has all been informed by the learning theory. Our what we understand about behavior is informed by learning theory, which basically in a nutshell, this could be oversimplified, but in a nutshell says that everything that we do is purposeful. It's to meet a need, to fulfill a desire. But if you can't figure out what that incentive is, then it must be for secondary gain, right? Have you heard this? There's some underlying motive that they might not be conscious of, or they just want the attention, right? But they're not looking at the neurological damage of someone who is affected by prenatal alcohol, or any other neurodiversity for that matter. You know, neurodiversity is that we are all wired differently. We are all unique, and that's very true. Each individual's combination of challenges and strengths and interests and preferred learning styles is as unique as our fingerprint. No two people are the same. Even twins differ in that. And so cookie cutter, and because someone's cognitive abilities is impacted differently from everyone else's cognitive abilities, cookie cutter approaches don't work. But cookie cutter approaches is what insurance pays for. And these so-called evidence-based practices. Well, evidence-based practices may work for most people, but they don't work so well for people who have neurological differences. You know, we would never fault a blind child for not being able to read the blackboard. We would never think we could, to be at risk for being sacrilegious, we would never tell a paralyzed child, get up and walk. You could do it if you tried harder. Right? We wouldn't do that. So if someone's brain is wired differently in such a way that it is difficult for them to meet expectations, it's not their fault. It's not their fault. And yet they're being blamed and shamed and oftentimes punished. So if you look at, for instance, I mentioned the commonalities with autism. The number one approved methodology for autism is applied behavior analysis, or ABA therapy. But ABA therapy is still compliance-based. It's figuring out what bribe or what consequence is going to work to get a child to do da 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 da. But bribes and incentives, and you know, whether a consequence is good or bad, pleasant or painful, that's not going to undo brain damage. It can't. So we need a neurological approach. And oftentimes people with an FASD have a different developmental pace. We used to call this dysmaturity, which is different from immaturity. If you have someone being immature, they can snap out of it. You point out their behavior and they stop it. And they immediately start acting their age. But someone who's on a different developmental timeline is developmentally much younger in an older body. And so if you think of all the kids in foster care who, because of alcohol exposure, because of drug exposure, because of trauma, and even trauma that the system itself induces through multiple placements, all those upheavals cause more trauma. Because of all that, they may be 17 physically, but they may only be 8 or 9 developmentally. They may, they may be like 20 something in their physical athleticness, physicality. They might be 25 in the way they can sass you and talk, but it doesn't mean that their comprehension level is that. They may only be able to comprehend language at maybe a 6th grade level. Their reasoning ability might only be at a 3rd grade level, even though they're seniors. And to tell a child, you better figure this out because you're gonna be 18 in 3 months, and then you're getting kicked out. You're getting kicked to the curb. And this happens all the time, all across our country. It's no wonder these kids fail and end up on the streets and end up in jail and in prison and committing suicide and homeless. An investment in diagnosing, asking those difficult questions in the medical appointments before the baby. Tell me about the last time you had, alcohol. It's doctors have often taken the tact of saying, well, you didn't drink while you were pregnant, did you? The way they phrase it tells a woman, I better say no, right? Instead, say, wow, what was life? Or what was life like in the months leading up to your pregnancy? What were the stresses that you had? How did you cope with those? How did you deal with those? If you socialized, were you, did you drink responsibly? Or were you a teetotaler? Our society has gotten to the point where people who want to be abstinent are the ones who have to defend their choice to not drink, which is totally backwards, but that's just me. Anyway.
Really, we have some women out there. I'd like us to focus more on these women. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts, especially focusing on the kids, which is so very important also to address. But to the women out there, we're talking about classicity right here now, and also stereotyping. We understand that even this fast is really prevalent, it's rife, but we are not talking about it. We're simply hiding it. So how can we begin to talk about this as regards to stereotyping?
There really, alcohol doesn't give a lick what color someone is, what language they speak, what their faith system is. Alcohol is everywhere. And wherever it is consumed, it's going to wreak havoc on the next generation and rob the next generation of potential. And I think it's been one of those topics that has been associated with the other side of the tracks. And so women who were, like I said earlier in the show, women who are in the right neighborhoods, they don't see themselves as being vulnerable while they're sipping their martini. They're totally blinded, but a lot of us live in denial about a lot of things. And I would say there's nothing worse than another thing, except with alcohol, we're really damaging the next generation. We're robbing the next generation. The fentanyl crisis is huge right now. It also has much more severe consequences than other drugs, but the losses tend to be more immediate, right? The overdoses happen and the losses are immediate. With FASD, the losses don't become apparent for years. And parents of children who are affected will grieve for years at the lost potential of their child, the dreams that never came true, the hopes that they had. watching their children struggle. No parent wants to see their child struggle at all, right? Our instinct is to make life better, but it can be very exhausting. And because FASD and all the problems that stem from it are so misunderstood, caregivers and family members often find themselves very isolated. Family members, neighbors, friends start dropping off, or they will say things like, "You're a bad parent. Just do this and the problem will go away." And so if you have a very challenging child who cannot cope with changes to environment, changes to routine, who's very defensive all the time, constantly feeling like a porcupine wrapped up in a ball, ready to spike anything, it's hard. That is hard parenting. And to lose your support system, it's very hard. And so we need to come together as a society and kind of hold each other up. There are lots of support groups on Facebook. When I was preparing the resource list for the back of my book, I got on Facebook and just did a brief search, entering an FASD, and there were 90 groups. So there's a lot of support out there. There are a lot of really good books out there. I'd like to say mine among them. There's one for, I don't know what age your audience generally is, but there is a new release that came out. A dear friend of mine wrote it, called Embracing Zach. And it's fiction, but it's really good education about FASD and neurodivergence in general, because there are characters in the book with PTSD, there's autism, there's ADHD. It's all in there. So delightful book, Embracing Zach. It's on Amazon. Weekend read, because once you pick it up, you won't be able to put it down. And then my book should be out in the next couple weeks. It is called Sip by Sip, Candid Conversations with Adults Living with FASD. And there's education throughout the book, but it is a series of conversations that I hold with other individuals who are, for the most part, learned about their FASD as adults. Was never diagnosed when they were kids. And they tell their stories about their struggles about, not understanding why they weren't fitting in, why they kept getting in trouble, what the issues were, what led them to finally consider alcohol as the source of their problems. I was 56 when I figured it out. And I was 61 when I was almost 61 when I was diagnosed. I asked my mom, I said, "Did you drink?" As I was learning, at the beginning when I dove into this field, I was like, "Oh, wow, I do this, I do that. I do that too." And so I asked my mom, "Did you drink when you carried me?" She's like, "Oh yeah, every day." Because it was the 60s. Nobody knew any better. So I've never blamed her. She didn't know any better. No one did back then. So
thank you for sharing your thoughts, Patti, with my audience on this very important topic. It's very, very, very important for us to begin to understand the importance of embracing this first, and how we can tackle it right on. Thank you, and I really wish you best of luck in this book project that is upcoming and in weeks to come. Patricia or Patti, can you share your social media handles, your website, so we can connect and learn more about you and what you have been up to lately?
Yes, so my website is patriciakasper.com. Kasper's with a K. So nice and simple, just my name. My podcast is Living with FASD. So, and my guests vary between medical doctors, psychologists, therapists of various sorts, as well as adults living with it, sharing their stories. So you can get a lot more education that way. On Facebook, it's just Patricia Kasper, or my business, which is Kasper's FASD Life Coaching and Training. So I just moved from California to North Dakota, and I changed my company's name when I got here, and so it's not rolling off my tongue yet. But in California, it was my full name with all my credentials, and I thought, you know what? That sounds so hoity-toity, and that's not me. I'm I'm too authentic for all that big-headedness. So yeah, Kasper's FASD Life Coaching and Training. So I'm on LinkedIn as Patricia Kasper. I'm on Instagram as your FASD coach. I'm on YouTube as Patricia Kasper, your FASD coach. So on YouTube, I have my podcast is there, and also there is another playlist on FASD tidbits or Free Friday tidbits. So it's a little short 5-10 minute lessons on different aspects of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and different characteristics of it, and how you can support someone around those particular bugaboos. Yeah, so that's how people can find me. So the podcast
Thank you so much.
the podcast is on Rumble, Spotify, YouTube, Patreon, and Pocket Casts and Audible.
Good to know that you also are a podcaster, as I am. I really appreciate that. I wish you best of luck in also your podcast journey. Patti Kasper, thank you for sharing your thoughts. You are a trauma-informed FASD coach, and we've been having a great time exploring this topic on our first, and how we can tackle it head-on in a society at large. Thank you once again for sharing your thoughts, for offering your valuable contribution to the topic of discussion. We sincerely, from the bottom of our heart, with the audience of Omobola Stephen, wish you all the best always. Now, if you'd like to catch up with any missed episodes of the podcast, you can do so on any cross-promotion platforms or any podcast distribution platforms you bump into online, and you have a great time listening to disruptive yet constructive mindship conversations on topics and subjects that are related to personal development and self-improvement, that is literally going to pivot the positive changes and transformation that you and I need in this side of eternity. Thank you once again for joining me. I talk to you soon. Thank you once again
for having me.
That was a great show we had.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.